When it comes to developing an inventory tracking system for the cannabis industry, technology companies have it just as hard as cannabis businesses, maybe even harder. So the term seed to sale is a term that was created out of thin air, and it just means a state-mandated state traceability platform. And the system was first required here in the state of Colorado due to the Cole memo. So essentially, the state of Colorado was trying to get the federal government off their back by implementing a state seed to sale tracking system to have transparency into the cannabis business. Over the past near 14 years, we have came a long way when it comes to cannabis technology and the tools that we have within the space. In the beginning, it was a lot of manual entry error, and there was nothing called an API or application program interface to help automate between the state traceability platform and the third-party integrator into the state traceability platform. But there is a problem here with third-party integrators, and they face multiple obstacles, such as integrating with the state traceability system, seed to sale system, or ensuring the platform has all of the compliance safeguards needed to stay in compliance with each state's unique set of rules and regulations, and what verticals in the supply chain they want to target with their software. So if you are in the process of integrating into the state seed to sale traceability systems such as Metrc, or dreaming of building your own technology system, then listen up. I'm going to go over the initial common questions that I received during initial consults that I have with technology solutions that I've worked with over the past 9 years within the cannabis industry. So by the end of this very short video, you will better understand the differences in structure between the different supply chains across multiple different states, the key differences between inventory tracking, batch tracking, serialization, and tag management, important compliance requirements to consider during your development, and the best way to integrate with Metrc, your third-party system, and a true ERP system. Notice that I said a true ERP system here. Many cannabis technology systems market themselves as an ERP, which is just simply not true, and overselling to prospective customers. According to Oracle, an ERP is software that organizations use to manage day-to-day business activities such as accounting, procurement, project management, risk management, and compliance, and supply chain operations. Notice that last little bit? That's the part that almost every cannabis software company provides you technology for, but almost none of the others. So let's get into it. Every state with medical or adult use cannabis has its own unique set of rules, regulations, and structure within the supply chain on how businesses do business together. States that have medical and adult use markets have two frameworks. Either the first framework is the moment the plant is put into the ground, it is labeled as medical or adult use, and it follows that supply chain to the final sale to the customer or to the patient, depending if it's medical or adult use. There are some caveats here on when those supply chains can cross over, but they're very unique workflows, and again, they're very unique to every single state. The other option is a single supply chain. So a single supply chain means that all the inventory is medical and adult use for the most part, from the time that the plant is put into the ground until it reaches the retailer. And then once when it has the final sale transaction at the retailer is what determines if it's a medical transaction or an adult use transaction. Again, there are some caveats here with like purchase limits, amount of the unit, and how much THC is in that unit. So broad strokes here, but just know that essentially every single market that has medical and adult use has two different supply chain structures for the most part. And I personally reference these two different types of structures as single supply chain or dual licensed supply chain, because for the medical and the adult use, for the two licenses to operate, usually you have to have two different cannabis business licenses to operate the adult use versus the medical. While when you're operating in the single supply chain, you normally don't need a medical and an adult use license to be able to produce product. So in addition to how the supply chain is structured, every single state is unique also on how you can do business with other businesses within the supply chain. So for example, in California, a distributor must transport and do the certificate of analysis or COA testing for all the businesses that that distributor works with. But in other states like Michigan, Colorado, even Massachusetts, you can distribute your own products as a cultivator or manufacturer. And usually that testing happens within the cultivation or manufacturing license. It's not shipped out of the license. The testing is conducted later on the supply chain in the distribution license. So all of these different types of examples are really important to understand how businesses do business with each other. So if you are developing a technology system, you understand how businesses can do what with each other, what they cannot do, and how they're supposed to legally operate within that state. And essentially, how cannabis operators can do business with each other is determined on the regulatory regime and laws structure the cannabis business's licenses in that specific state. So really, you're gonna have to dive into the regulations. Also, if there's initial bills or anything like that, why that state went adult use or medical, those types of documentation is what's going to unpack how the businesses can do business together throughout the supply chain and how licenses are structured within that state. All right, now that we are aware of the framework of the supply chain, let's look at some common terms that can get a bit confusing. So first, let's take a look at all of these different terms. We have a Metrc package tag, a Metrc plant tag, unique identifier or UID, a harvest batch, a production batch, testing lot or testing batch, a SKU, and UPC code. SKUs and UPCs are common terms in any inventory tracking system in any industry. Essentially, a SKU is tied to a specific product type from a specific batch or even a specific individual unit, while a UPC is a universal product code for labeling of a specific product and that specific product type, independent of the batch, which this can get a bit messy in Metrc world. While a unique identifier is usually a term found within the rules and regulations, and this unique identifier language is really just trying to explain a Metrc package tag or plant tag without actually saying Metrc within the rules and regulations. And as for batches, a harvest batch is usually the same variety of cannabis harvested at the same time with the exact same growing techniques. Each state will have its own definition. However, as a broad overview here, this is what a harvest batch is. And the same is for a production batch as well, but this usually happens in like the manufacturing or processing space. And this is usually the same product produced at the same time with the same production techniques with a homogenized input of hash and ingredients with a homogenized output. Now, here's where things get a bit complicated. No surprise, right? You can have multiple testing lots to the same harvest batch. So for example, if you harvest, let's say 50 pounds, or one of your client harvests 50 pounds, but they're in Oklahoma and they're only allowed to have 10-pound batches or a harvest batch, then that harvest batch actually has to be broken down into 10-pound increments, and then those 10 pounds are tested. So for that 50-pound harvest batch, you would actually have 5 testing lots to 1 harvest batch. And personally, I actually don't prefer to say the term test batch. I like to say test lot because a testing lot describes that it's a subsection of the harvest batch. And again, you could have multiple testing lots to 1 harvest batch. So as you begin developing your software, there are going to be some critical compliance elements you need to be aware of depending on the state and the area within the supply chain that you are targeting for your software. The first is purchase limits equivalencies, to ensure the point of sale does not oversell to a customer, resulting in almost a near instant violation for that customer or that client. Purchase limits are calculated by the total weight purchased or the total THC in the packaging. And these purchase limits are different by state, and the equivalency between dry flower and manufactured products such as edibles and concentrates are also different calculations in nearly every state. This is why I say equivalencies, because a lot of times these manufactured products are equivalent to an ounce of flour. And then you have to look at and/or statements and how you're allowed to purchase all of these elements together, these different types of products together. So again, different states, different rules, they're going to be unique. And as a purchase limit rule of thumb, you need to be adaptable here to be able to have equivalencies that are weight-based, that are THC potency-based, and different unit of measures like grams, milligrams, ounces, what have you. Next, you also need to consider tax reporting with who is responsible for the collection, who is responsible for the business records, and also, especially in the point of sale, who's responsible for entering in these tax codes and these tax requirements within the point of sale, so that way the sales transactions are reporting all of the taxes you need to collect. Personally, what I suggest for liability reasons is to always have your customer enter in the tax requirement, so that way you as the point of sale, you're not entering in this information. Next thing you know, you're reporting incorrectly, and then if the retailer is under-reporting and not paying enough in their taxes, there's a lot of liability here. So my best practice for you here is to have tax reporting, put it into your customer's hands, and have them set that up in the point of sale for what they need to collect. Another element to consider is testing reporting and collecting this information and having proper product recall tracking. And finally, the most important elements is labels. So labels can be a very sensitive topic because labels are not allowed to overlap each other. This is something that regulators look for within the dispensary specifically, and to make sure that there's no labels overlapping each other, and so that way the consumer or the medical patient has everything that they need on the label and there's nothing obstructing that view. And it's best practice here to provide multiple label sizes, so that way your client can determine what size of label they need for what specific product they need. Labels can be very finicky as well, because sometimes the regulations are not clear on who is responsible for putting what elements onto that label. So again, just be as adaptable as possible here. The more adaptable you are, the better it will be for your clients, and probably the more clients that you'll have, because they'll love your labels engine. And when it comes to integrating with Metrc, my biggest piece of advice here is to try to not target the entire supply chain in multiple states. So just as a regulating rule of thumb, integrating rule of thumb, it's so tough to develop a technology solution that is compliant in every single state and across the supply chain. So really what you want to do is find your niche. Do you want to focus on growers or manufacturers or distributors or retailers? Focus in that area. And if you want to focus in that area, then look at expanding into other states. But really trying to develop a full supply chain solution here and be compliant in all of the other states is just not possible. It's not something that I've been able to see. It is not something I've seen to date. And I've worked with nearly every technology system out there, and it's just very challenging to be compliant in every single state and have your full Metrc integration and focus on the full supply chain. And just know, technically from like a Metrc integration standpoint, you can go into every state. And with a very few simple API endpoints, technically you can go into that state. But will you be successful in that state? That's a whole other separate issue, because Metrc will allow you to record anything and everything. So if you're going to be that integrator, that safety net for them, and have those safeguards, you better be sure to have those safeguards from a rules and regulations standpoint to ensure that your clients do not go out of compliance with everything from labels, testing, purchase limits, tax collection, and how people do business with each other. And no, just because you passed the Metrc API test and now an approved vendor, this does not mean that you are compliant in that state. This step takes a lot of work. And to build these safeguards, you need to ensure your customers stay in compliance with your system from Metrc, rules, tax collection, anything and everything. In the past near 9 years in the industry, I found it's best to use a cannabis-specific software while you're doing your plant touching actions within the business. And then if you want to use an ERP system to have that plant touching system submit the data into the ERP so that way you can see the business as a whole, great. And so how this flow would look is that cannabis specific software would integrate directly into Metrc, and then also it would push that information into the ERP system so that way you can understand the business from a centralized perspective through the ERP. I do not suggest playing telephone with your ERP, cannabis specific software, and Metrc. When you do something like you're integrating all of those together and playing telephone between all three technology systems, things just go wrong between the APIs and you're putting your clients at risk, and something I highly do not suggest that you do. Look, this is just the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to compliant workflows, operating best practices, and how to integrate with Metrc. If you are interested to work with me, then click the link below to schedule an initial consultation. After just 10 hours together, you will walk away with a full roadmap on how to develop your software and adapt to any state's rules and regulations, expediting your market expansion and getting ahead of the hard-to-find answers while building your Metrc automation. So click the link below to schedule an initial consult with me to see if I can help you today. Have a good one.